I just love how it's great that God quite often confirms what you're going to speak about on a Sunday. What Eileen was sharing, some of that will come in on this, and I started off this morning after I'd planned all this, and I watched a little bit of the start of the service from the commemoration for the Bradford fire, which was 40 years ago today. Quite an emotional day for me. I was in the stand at the fire on that day. But the bit I saw from the service was they were playing You'll Never Walk Alone. And Eileen there saying about we're never alone. And Isaiah, and how he was, never alone. Elijah, sorry, yeah. And how he was never alone. And, God is always with us. And as I was planning this, I'd not actually realised that today was actually the anniversary. And the word God was speaking to me about was through the book of Daniel, and about some of the characters in Daniel, Daniel being one of them, and Shadrach, Meshack and Abendigo, who went into the fiery furnace. So I think it's quite poignant that God's got me speaking on this today, on the this 40th anniversary of the fire. So I'm going to do. There's quite a lot of verses in this, so I'm going to read them. I've missed quite a few out, but because it's actually 2 chapters, so I'm going to do an overview of chapter 2 of Daniel, and base it around the 3. Moz gave me the idea for the title for this one the other day. I was talking about it, and I was talking about Meshack and Abendigo, and he said, "What you mean? The Blazing Squad." So today's title is The Blazing Squad. And I'm just going to start by reading a few verses from Daniel chapter 2, which is the chapter before, just to set a bit of the scene. What happened? It says, "In the 2nd year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled and he couldn't sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers and the astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, 'I've had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means.' The astrologers answered the king, 'May the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it.' The king then replies to the astrologers, 'This is what I firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was, and then interpret it, I will have you cut into pieces, and your houses turned into piles of rubble. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and then interpret it for me.' And then I'll miss quite a few verses out here. In amongst all this, the king then orders all the wise men to be killed, because none of them will do what he's asked them to do. And all the wise men, that included Daniel. Daniel was a prophet of God. He was a man of God. I just love when I look at the book of Daniel and look about Daniel, how he was in exile. He was taken into captivity. He was a prisoner, in effect. And he was in captivity, yet he still served his king with everything that he had. So Daniel spoke to the person who was being sent out to kill everybody. And Daniel said, 'Just give me some time and I will do it for you. I'll interpret the dream.' Because he knew that God, and he had God on his side. He knew he wasn't alone. So then in verse 17, Daniel returned to his house and he explained the matter to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And he urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised God. I love the fact that Daniel didn't do it by himself. He went to his friends and he said, stand with me on this. He wasn't alone. He had other people around him, and he said, stand with me, let's pray to God, and God will show me. So then Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to execute the wise men of Babylon, and he said to them, don't execute them all. He said, take me to the king, and I will interpret his dream for him. This was the dream, and now we will interpret it for the king. Your Majesty, you are the King of Kings. This was once he'd got to Nebuchadnezzar. He said, the God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed all mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds of the sky. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are the head of gold. After you, another kingdom will arise inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Finally, there'll be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things into pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Just as you saw that the feet and the toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron. So this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mix with the clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not be united, any more than iron mixes with clay. At this, Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor and ordered that an offering and incense be presented to him. Then the king said to Daniel, surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you could reveal this mystery. So the king placed Daniel in a high position and lavished many gifts on him, made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon, and made him in charge of all its wise men. Moreover, at Daniel's request, the king then appointed Shadrach, Meshack, and Abendigo administrators over the province of Babylon, while Daniel himself remained at the royal court. So that's just a summary of chapter 2. When Daniel interpreted this dream, he was clear about where the dream was from. He was clear that this dream was from God. And Nebuchadnezzar recognized that in what he said to Daniel, that it was God that had given him the interpretation. Yet what I always find really funny with this is that Nebuchadnezzar still ordered offering and incense then to be given to Daniel and not to God. I just think straight away in chapter 2 in Daniel we see how the king Nebuchadnezzar kept having God speaking to him, but he never quite got the true meaning of what God was saying to him. Daniel, I'm sure, wanted God to get the glory and not him. And he wanted the glory to be God's alone. But Nebuchadnezzar didn't quite see it. So then we move on to chapter 3. So that's just a background to chapter 3. So we move on to chapter 3 and we can see how Nebuchadnezzar had reacted to the dream. He had every chance to ensure that God's plans were outworked. He was given a warning about the kingdom that will fall because of division. He had every chance to commit himself and all the people to God's service. But he seemed to forget all the bad things in his dream, and he used in some way, some people would say when they see this, that he used that dream then to increase his own power and to move further away from a godly society. I was just thinking how often we hear something. We hear something that is spoken, something that somebody says to us, and we only hear the things that we want to hear, rather than listening to the whole thing and listening to what's being said. As an example, so many times I can, especially when they were younger, I'd call out to my kids to ask them to do a job for me or to help with something. And after I've asked them for about the 5th time, by which point you're getting quite annoyed that they've not been doing what you've asked them to, they claim that they'd never heard you. Yet then, at another time, I might say, like this afternoon, oh, let's go to the fair. Or let's go out somewhere to eat. And suddenly they appear. And sometimes they even appear before I've even finished what I'm saying. When it's a good thing, when it's what they want to hear, people will respond, and they'll respond. In the New Testament, in 2 Timothy chapter 4, it says, "For a time is coming when people will no longer listen to sound and wholesome teaching. They'll follow their own desires and will look for teachers who will tell them whatever their itching ears are wanting to hear." But I think that's not just in "a time is coming," that's throughout history. That's what Nebuchadnezzar was hearing. Nebuchadnezzar was hearing what he wanted to hear. Nebuchadnezzar ordered that there would be an image of gold built. I just thought that was a bit of light-hearted intermission. So King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold. He made it 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. That was big, and it was gold. And he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, the prefects, the governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the officials to come to the dedication of the image that he had set up. So the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the advisors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. So here's King Nebuchadnezzar, who's just had a dream about a giant statue and had this warning that it would fall because of lack of unity. And the first thing he does is the bit he sees from his dream is that he sees, oh, big statue of gold. I'll build one of those and everybody can worship it. Yet he's already shown that the one true God, and he's already said that to Daniel, that surely your God is the God. But it soon changed in the way he was speaking on that. So the herald loudly proclaimed, "Nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will be immediately thrown into a blazing furnace." Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, he likes to repeat everything I've noticed in this, and long lists. Yeah, the band, and all kinds of music, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. At the same time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. Your Majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, and all the other instruments, must fall down and worship the image of gold. And whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews who we have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshack, and Abendigo, who pay no attention to you, your Majesty. They don't serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." He was furious with rage. So Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshack, and Abendigo, and these men were brought before the king. And he said, "Is it true that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I've set up? Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, and etc., etc., if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I have made, then very good. but if you don't worship it, you'll be thrown into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" Shadrach, Meshack, and Abednego replied to him, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we're thrown into the blazing furnace, then the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you've set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshack, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in the army to tie up Shadrach, Meshack, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of fire killed the soldiers who took Shadrach, Meshack, and Abednego up to the furnace. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet in amazement and asked his advisers, "Were there not 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, your majesty." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshack, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshack, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the royal advisers crowded around them. They saw the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor there was a hair on their head singed. Their robes were not scorched, there was no smell of fire on them. And Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshack, and Abednego, who has sent this angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship." I've lost where I am now. "Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshack, and Abednego be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned into a pile of rubble." He liked that one. He liked doing that, didn't he? Yeah, it's like cut them into pieces and turn the houses into a pile of rubble. "For no other God can save in this way." And then he promoted Shadrach, Meshack, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. I just love that story, and again, it brings back some ways the how we saw God work in the Bradford fire when my dad had got a brand. I think I've told this story before, but for those who don't know, my dad had got a brand new. It was like a suede sheepskin jacket that he'd just bought, which was highly trendy in the 1980s, apparently, and he'd just bought that. And I remember before the game, there were people all around him smoking, like they did at football matches in those days. And I remember him saying that. I remember him praying, "God, please don't let my jacket get burned." Little did he know what was about to happen. And at the end of, once we'd left the stadium, we'd managed to get out at the far end of the stadium and onto the pitch. And the fire had been catching us faster than we could run. And he got on there and he checked his jacket and there wasn't a mark on it. And it didn't even smell of fire. And I sit there and I look at that and I'm saying, I've seen that happen, and only God can do that. So interestingly, like I've just said, Nebuchadnezzar had had a dream of a gold statue. So what does he do? The first thing he does is he builds a gold statue for everybody to worship. And as you can see, he uses this to create more power for himself rather than being subject to God's power. The vision had shown the feet of the statue were part clay and part iron, two different materials that don't work well together. One would cause the statue to eventually fall. But Nebuchadnezzar knew that the society that he wanted to build had to be strong and had to be united in order to be strong. So his idea was, we'll get everybody to focus on one statue and worship it. It would build a strong, united society focused on the power and the authority of Nebuchadnezzar. God was speaking so clearly through Daniel to Nebuchadnezzar, yet Nebuchadnezzar couldn't hear God in the situation. And you see this over and over again throughout his reign and throughout the captivity in Babylon, that his own pride stopped him from hearing the voice of God. Again and again, he just heard what he wanted to hear. He heard the part about him being the golden head and the strength, but he didn't hear the warnings that went with it. He didn't hear the warnings about the eventual downfall. He wanted to leave a legacy. He wanted to be a great leader. He wanted his power to increase. And his pride stopped him from hearing what God was saying. For us, God may be wanting to speak to us right now. He may be wanting to speak to us this week. He may be wanting to speak to us today. But we have to be in a place to hear him. As I was preparing this week and preparing for speaking, I found it really difficult to find the time to just sit down and listen to God and listen to what he was saying. And even this morning, I felt I haven't given as much preparation as I'd have liked to. But God confirmed what he wanted me to say. So I know that somebody will get, this is for somebody here, at least. But work commitments get in the way, family gets in the way. Everything takes up so much time that we don't always have that time to spend that time with God. My work and what I'm doing is getting busier all the time. Other demands keep piling on, yet God keeps saying to me, am I making enough time for him? Am I building a relationship with him so I can hear what he's wanting to say? Eileen said this morning, this was another confirmation for what I had to say today, that Eileen had said this morning that the Bible and it talks about us hearing that still small voice. We can't do that when we're in the noise and the hustle and bustle of everything. We need to take time out to be with God. Like any relationship, to build a relationship, we need to spend time with the person we're wanting to get to know. What gets in your way of hearing God? There's many things in our lives that can get in the way of us hearing God. Nebuchadnezzar was clearly being shown who the true God was through Daniel's interpretation, through Shadrach, Meshack and Abendigo. Yet his pride kept stopping him from listening. The statue was an immense sculpture, a focal point for everybody in the kingdom and beyond. Nebuchadnezzar had decreed that whenever people heard the sound of music, they should worship the statue, bow down to it in respect. Listening is so important. You can't get to know someone if you don't listen to them. All Nebuchadnezzar did was think of himself. He wasn't listening to what God was saying. All the time in his mind he was thinking, how can this make me greater? I know Moz has spoken in the past about and done examples of taking time out to meditate. Taking time out just to be quiet and just to focus on God. It can be such a great habit to get into. Shadrach, Meshack and Abendigo, however, had a relationship with God. They take time out to pray. They took time out to spend time with him. How did they react to everything as they heard God? From chapter 2, they were advisors. Chapter 2 tells us they were advisors of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar just wanted to get rid of the Jews, and a lot of the advisors wanted to get rid of the Jews, and they felt threatened by them. And so his advisors told Nebuchadnezzar they're not doing what they're supposed to and needed to be punished. And because of that decree that had already been made, Nebuchadnezzar was forced to carry out the punishment, even if he didn't necessarily want to. I found it interesting to see how, once they were arrested, the three of them reacted and how they reacted to the king and the questioning. So often when we're confronted with something, we feel we've got to stand up for God. We've got to say something. We've got to stand up for what we believe. Yet here, Shadrach and Meshack and Abendigo said very little. Jesus, when he was on trial before his crucifixion, he said very little. There's so much that Jesus could have said, but they only said what they needed to. They knew the power of their God, and they knew their actions would speak louder than words in the situation. So in our own lives, do our actions match what we say? We say we're a Christian. Do our actions match what we're saying we are? If someone from the church, someone from here was to see you at work or in another situation you're in, would how we live day to day be consistent with what we say and with what we believe? Our words mean nothing if we don't have actions to back them up. So here we see Shadrach, Meshack and Abendigo. They didn't say much. They said, we know God will save us. I just love the fact they put a clause at the end, but if he doesn't, then we still won't worship your God. But rather than getting it wrong, they would rather die, and they would rather give the glory to God in that way. And so often we try to fit in with the society around us, saying things, doing things that will make us fit in. Sometimes it's not God's best for us. Sometimes it takes work. And we need to see work. And we need to work at seeing God's best in the situation. And it's not always easy, but God is always faithful. And God will always come through. We've said so many times before, and we talk about it a lot, on seeing things through that lens of Jesus. As we get to know God, as we spend time with him, we'll see through that lens and we'll see what God wants in the situation. I remember years ago they used to have those like wristbands that people used to wear that had WWJD on. It was, what would Jesus do? And but that's sometimes the way we need to think. You know, well, what would Jesus do in this situation? We'll look at it through his lens and see what God and what Jesus would say in the situation. Things at that point, and at that point with Shadrach, Meshack and Abendigo, seemed dull. They seemed dire, they seemed dark. But for us and for them, if we act in the way that he wants us to, God will always come through and he makes things better than ever. The Bible says God causes all things to work together for good for those who love him. It doesn't say our lives will be great. It doesn't say everything's going to be great. It says God causes all things to work together for good. So even the bad things will come together for good when we keep our trust in God. Shadrach, Meshack and Abendigo were here facing a furnace. Not only that, but Nebuchadnezzar had ordered the furnace to be made 7 times hotter than it normally would have been. Now this furnace was probably the furnace that was used to make the statue out of gold. So it was already hot enough to melt gold, but he ordered it to be 7 times hotter. So the furnace wasn't just for burning people, it was for making the things that were made of gold and other metals. The very thing that made the idol they were supposed to be worshipping was going to be used to sentence them to death. It was so hot, at 7 times hotter, that it killed the guards when they were putting them into the furnace. It can't have seemed that great to them as they were looking at being thrown into a furnace. But they still knew at that point and had a true faith that God would protect them. They saw the situation through God's lens and had faith in him. And then it says Nebuchadnezzar was amazed by the fact that these men were in the furnace and there was a 4th man in there. Again, like Eileen was saying, we're never alone. They could have felt so alone in that situation, even though there were 3 of them. Sometimes there can be more than one of us and we still feel alone. But they had a 4th man in there with them. And they were just walking around in the furnace. Nebuchadnezzar ordered them out. Not a hair on the head was scorched. Or their clothes were scorched. Or the clothes weren't touched. Their faith had proved true. How many times have you been to a bonfire? You get home, you may have been nowhere near the fire. I've been to the Bolton Abbey one quite a few years ago, and you're miles away from the fire. Yet you get back and your clothes smell of fire. Not even their clothes smelt of fire. He didn't just do a miracle and save them. He looked after every single detail. God is a God of detail. And he looks after the details. So when we stand up for God, he's not only just going to save us and help us, he'll always go the extra mile. He'll always look after the little details we may not have even given a second thought to. I'm sure Shadrach, Meshack and Abendigo weren't thinking, oh, I hope my clothes don't smell when I come out of here. But God looked at those details. God here again proved himself to Nebuchadnezzar. Yet we read on in through Daniel, and he never quite heard God. He still wasn't in the place to hear God. He had a great opportunity to follow the true God and bring the whole nation with him. He even went as far as to say anybody will be punished if they say anything against this God. Yet his pride still stopped him. And as you read more about Nebuchadnezzar through the Bible, you can see how he keeps hearing God but not listening. So as I just close, I just want to ask just a couple of questions for you to think about. So, what stops you from hearing God? Do you need to spend more time with him? Does pride get in the way? Do you need to spend more time with other people who will hear and help you to hear God's voice? Do you just try and fit in with society around you? Today, we can all make that decision to stand for him, to listen to his voice, and to make a difference. And as we stand up for him, he'll be there in whatever we face. As we look through his lens and we look at his word, then he'll be there and we'll never be alone.